Ladies and gentlemen, the other day I'm looking around and I'm saying, I need to become part of a Carolina Panthers group that stays positive even in these tough times. And I'll tell you what, boy, have I found a group, the Carolina Panthers Den. It's on Facebook and you need to join today. This is a group that stays positive, has a good time, and interacts with a lot of other different Carolina Panthers fans. If you want to have a great time and talk about your team, encourage your team in a way that is done very professionally, then become a member of the Carolina Panthers Den on Facebook. Make sure to join today. You are watching Frankly Speaking Sports, live from Charlotte, North Carolina. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking Sports. I'm your host, Larry Frank, and it's a beautiful Monday night out here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Unfortunately, the football team has not done much for us lately. You know, for those of you fans that are frustrated, I understand. For those of you fans that are here that are discouraged, I understand. For those of you fans that, say the team isn't playing well, you're absolutely right. But at the end of the day, we are still all Carolina Panther fans. And that's what you got to remember. It's not a great time, but you got to understand, there are going to be teams. Winning is a process. And right now, we are not doing a great job in executing the process that has to be delivered in order for us to win games. Yesterday was no different. The Panthers lost to the Patriots 24-6, a team that was beatable, yet it seems like every team that is beatable, the Carolina Panthers have trouble with. And it all stems from a lot of reasons. But when you look at this game and you break down this game, the Panthers lost 24-6. They did not score one touchdown in this game. Once again, it was Zane Gonzalez with 2 field goals. They only had 240 yards, 78 on the ground, 162 passing. They were 3 of 11. That's right, folks. 3 of 11 on third downs. They had 23 rushes and 35 passes. Now remember, this is a team that the week before had 40-something rushes. The running game was not there. We'll talk about that in a minute, and we'll explain why the running game wasn't there. They had 3 turnovers. That was 3 ugly interceptions, and I say ugly, by quarterback Sam Darnold. And then again, and I'll say it again and again, it was 10 penalties. 10 penalties in this game, or should I say 10 more penalties in this game that caused the Carolina Panthers to lose again. The Patriots, 32 minutes and 29 seconds worth of time of possession. Meanwhile, the Panthers, only 27 minutes and 31 seconds. So once again, the majority of the game, we're finding our defense on the football field. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, folks, and we'll get to some of our clips right here. Let's go all the way up. This game was an ugly game in a lot of different fronts. And, we'll talk about the defense in a minute, but I want to start with the obvious problem. The entire year now, even before the year began, we talked about how poorly this offensive line was. And don't get me wrong, I've been sticking up for them to some degree, especially last week when they ran 45 times, and I thought they did a hell of a job when they had 200 yards rushing. But this was a game where, first of all, Paradis goes down, Irvin goes down, two of your starting offensive linemen who were only average to begin with, and now you got to bring in their backups. So you can imagine how quickly this offensive line just fell completely apart. But this is an offensive line we've been talking about the entire year. This isn't that something that just came up 1 game ago, 2 games ago, yet even 3 games ago. This is something that was coming up even before the season started. And yet this team, this front office, continues to do nothing about it. Instead of making the necessary moves to improve the offensive line, they make such excuses as there is no one available. There are people available. And let me tell you something. They cannot be much worse than what you already have. So you might as well give them a chance. But when you look at this offensive line, they were not only terrible with opening up lanes yesterday, they were also terrible on protecting quarterback Sam Darnold as well, who was 16 of 33, 172 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. 3 interceptions, 3 interceptions, 3 interceptions. That's 3 too many. And some of them were ugly. Some of them were just being thrown on when he was running. Now, a lot of talk around the Carolina area from the fans, and I love all of you fans, but I want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen to me really, really, really good. I'm not going to sit here and defend Sam Darnold. That's not what I'm going to do. But what I am going to do is tell you right now, it doesn't matter if you have Sam Darnold as your quarterback or Tom Brady as your quarterback. Until you fix that offensive line, there is not a quarterback in the NFL or out of the NFL that would succeed on this team. The reason being is the hell with who your quarterback is right now. You need to fix that offensive line. And until you fix that offensive line, you're never going to be successful with no matter what quarterback you have. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Sam Darnold is a great quarterback and it's the offensive line, not the offensive line's fault. I'm not saying Sam Darnold is great, but you cannot judge this guy with this offensive line that the Carolina Panthers have put together. Now, if Sam Darnold's thrown interception after interception after interception, and you have a great offensive line and you're giving him time to throw the ball, then that's another issue. Once again, I'm not justifying whether Sam is good or whether Sam is bad. All I'm saying is you're never going to know how good or how bad Sam Darnold is until you fix that damn offensive line, which is terrible. And what bothers me is you haven't seen Scott Fitterer, you haven't seen Tepper, you haven't seen any of these front office guys doing anything to improve the offensive line. Matt Rule can only work with what he is given. He does not make the personnel decisions above what happens on game day on the field. This is the offensive line he's been given. He can only make these guys and motivate these guys and bring out the best in them on what they currently have available. And right now, the availability is not very good. So the heck with saying get a new quarterback, get a Cam Newton, get a Deshaun Watson, or get a whoever. It doesn't matter with this offensive line, folks. You gotta fix the offensive line before anything is gonna get better. Your running game isn't gonna get better. It doesn't matter. The only thing that's gonna happen to Christian McCaffrey with this offensive line is he's gonna get the crap beat out of him, and he's gonna be missing a lot of games due to injuries. So they gotta, there are people out there. Don't let this team fool you. You may have to give up a decent player in order to get a decent player back. But you're going to have to juggle things around, and you're going to have to fix these issues. Because you know what? Whether it's this year, whether it's next year, it doesn't matter. You're going to continue to lose football games and have no offense. It starts with the offensive line. And it doesn't matter. Look how many great weapons you have on this offense that are not being shown right now because of your weak offensive line. What bothers me is I have seen nothing, no effort from this team to do anything about the issue. The issue is very simple to figure out. It's right in front of our eyes, yet no one wants to do anything about it. Now, like I said, a terrible game from Sam Darnold yesterday. Besides the 3 interceptions, he was 9 of 14 yesterday, folks. And I would say 9 of those passes were completed to running backs out of the backfield because he had to get rid of the ball so darn quick that he couldn't even see downfield. It was completely ridiculous. You are embarrassed if you are a Carolina Panthers fan. He had 8 balls deflected. 8 of his passes were deflected. 16 of 33, folks. That's not even 50% that he had yesterday. And 8 of those incomplete passes are tipped. 3 of the other ones are intercepted. That is offensive line. Why do passes get deflected, folks? They get deflected because the defensive line is, to put it real simple to you, they are beating the crap out of your offensive line, and they're getting pursuit, and they're able to get in your quarterback's face, or at least far enough by that offensive line to lift their hands up and block passes. 8 deflected passes in yesterday's game. Ridiculous. And I'm saying it right now, fans. We're going to be Panther fans. We're not going to be these cop-out fans that say our team is playing bad, this or that. Okay, we are going to say what needs to be executed and done correctly so it doesn't happen again. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I said it already a couple times since we've been airing, if you don't fix the offensive line, nothing else will come to tuition. No matter who your quarterback is, no matter who your running back is. You got to fix that offensive line. Yesterday, I like to give the defense credit, and overall, defense does a good job. But yesterday, the run defense was not effective. And, we can make any excuses. We can say they're tired. They're on the field a lot. But at the end of the day, that did not lose the game for us. The Pats ran the ball very, very effectively. They had a great plan. They ran the ball 41 times, passed 18 times, and they rushed for over 150 yards. Ramondre Stevenson was running like a beast, averaging 6.2 yards a carry. Meanwhile, Brandon Bolden was averaging 6.8 yards per carry, and they both were catching some passes out of the backfield. The Pats mixed it up. Mac Jones wasn't effective. He didn't do anything outstanding, but he played good enough to win. And when you have a running attack working, when your passing attack is not working, that is what's going to happen. overall, they stuffed up and stopped Damian Harris. I mean, he was 15 to 30, only averaged 15 rushes for 30 yards, only averaged 2 yards a carry. So they did a good job with Damian Harris, but the other two running backs were utilized the correct way. Whereas when you look at the Carolina Panthers, what they do, they only gave the ball to Christian McCaffrey to run. Christian McCaffrey ran the ball. Hubbard only had 3 rushes. Abdullah, who was a beast last week, only ran the ball 1 time. Now, Hubbard and, as I mentioned, and Abdullah caught some passes out of the backfield, but this is a team that just went to Christian McCaffrey. Everybody, whether you were watching it on TV, in the stadium or on the other sideline, knew what you were going to do. You're going to get this poor guy destroyed before the year is over. There are more people on this team called Christian McCaffrey, and it's going to take more than Christian McCaffrey to win, okay? The reason why they ran the ball last week a lot better than they did this week is because they mixed it up between Abdullah and Freeman, who was released today, now that McCaffrey's back, and also Hubbard. They all ran the ball. They didn't know where it was coming from. They were able to use play action. But yesterday, with that offensive line doing so poorly, Christian McCaffrey, every single play, I could have stopped Christian McCaffrey yesterday from running the ball. And then, we're going to take a quick station break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Robbie Anderson, some of his frustration, what it means to the Carolina Panthers, what I noticed from Robbie Anderson yesterday, and about the frustration. We will talk about that right after we come back from these quick messages. Ladies and gentlemen, the other day I'm looking around and I'm saying, I need to become part of a Carolina Panthers group that stays positive even in these tough times. And I'll tell you what, boy, have I found a group, the Carolina Panthers Den. It's on Facebook and you need to join today. This is a group that stays positive, has a good time, and interacts with a lot of other different Carolina Panthers fans. If you want to have a great time and talk about your team, encourage your team in a way that is done very professionally, then become a member of the Carolina Panthers Den on Facebook. Make sure to join today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Frankly Speaking Sports. I'm your host, Larry Frank. We're about 10 minutes away from having Josh Rawitch, the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's right. The president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum will be joining us live right here on the Frankly Speaking Sports Network. We also want to thank everybody that's listening on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. We love Tobacco Road Sports Radio. They continue to grow on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. And I'll tell you what a great job they did with high school football this past Friday night. And I'm sure they'll be doing again this upcoming Friday. So tune in to TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com. But we are, like I said, about 10 minutes away from having Josh Rawitch with us. But before going to break, I was talking about Robbie Anderson. A lot of us saw frustration yesterday, threw his helmet against the bench. And I'm going to tell you what, Robbie Anderson has a right. I will repeat this. He has a right to go ahead. Let me just say, okay, good. I thought I had a phone message. So one of our listeners coming in. All right, let me just get that off. We don't need that. Okay, good. I'm just double checking, folks. Stay with me 1 sec. Want to make sure that wasn't him, but yeah, a lot of people actually texting, and I'm pulling up a text, so I can find it here. If not, that's all right, no big deal. But anyway, a lot of people saying, that doesn't look good, does it, Larry? I'm going to tell you what, as a coach, I love to see Robbie Anderson getting frustrated. You know why I like to see Robbie Anderson getting frustrated there? He's not hurting the team there. What Robbie Anderson is saying, in maybe a language that other people are not accustomed to, is he's saying he cares. He cares. He cares. He cares. If he doesn't get frustrated, he doesn't care. If other people on that team, on that offense, on that defense is not getting upset at the way this team is playing, they don't care. Robbie Anderson cares. Robbie Anderson wants to be part of a winning team. No one has sacrificed more on this team this year than Robbie Anderson. Now, yes, he has had some games where he has dropped some footballs. That happens. We understand that. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that is supposed to be a major weapon on your offense and is not getting any plays in the game because you have a quarterback that right now is ineffective because you have such a poor offensive line. When Robbie Anderson gets upset here, folks, he's caring about the team. He is frustrated just like we are. And we get upset at whether you're watching on a sports bar or in the stadium. That's his way. He's releasing frustration because he cares. It's one thing if you're winning and you're scoring a lot of points and you have a winning record and there's a guy out there getting frustrated because he's not getting the ball. That's not the case here with Robbie Anderson. The case is he's frustrated because of the lack of offense that it is being produced on this team. It's not all about Sam Darnold. He knows that. Yet, Sam Darnold is the quarterback. He's going to take a lot of the heat. Sam Darnold has not been effective. We all know that. We can't look and say Sam Darnold's been playing his best football. But something was going on those first 3 games, folks, that was different than these last five or six games that the Carolina Panthers have been playing. I don't know what it is, except that maybe the digression of the offensive line is getting worse every week. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, we've seen what he has the ability to do. Okay? And once again, I know we've mentioned it's like beating a dead horse here when I keep saying you're never going to know what this guy is capable of until you at least respect him enough to give him just a decent offensive line. You might be able to tell. But this is such a poor executed offensive line between the penalties and just the poor blocking. I mean, it's incredible. They're getting beat left and right. There's guys getting through this line, this offensive line, that are not even being touched. You don't even got to wash their uniforms at the end of the game because they're still clean. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. So, you got it. Now, there is a couple of people you got to give some credit to. Shaq Thompson, as always, played a terrific game, I thought, yesterday. Had 10 tackles, 1 for a loss. Jeremy Chin, I think, had 11 tackles, 2 for a loss. And then Brian Burns, 5 tackles and a sack. But it's not enough, folks. It's not enough. We talk about this week in and week out, how you have to keep your defense off the field and win the time of the possession battle. And as I mentioned earlier, the Pats beat the time of possession battle 32 minutes and 29 seconds to the Panthers 27 minutes and 31 seconds. What that tells me, your defense is on the field a lot more than your offense. And of course, it's no secret to anyone out there that our offense wasn't able to sustain any yardage in that game. The next question pops up as we have 5 minutes before we're supposed to have Josh Rawitch the Hall of Fame president, on with us. Question you got to ask is about Matt Rule. Matt Rule, a lot of people, question, once again, Matt Rule has a lot of weapons. He has a great defense, has a lot of offensive weapons, but lacks, as we mentioned, an offensive line. Everywhere, when Matt Rule was at Temple, when he was at Baylor, usually it takes Matt Rule 3 years to turn around a program. Now, I'm not saying because he turned two college universities, Temple and Baylor, around, and it took him exactly 3 years, that he'll do the same thing with Carolina. But once again, just like you got to give Sam Darnold a shot, you got to give Matt Rule a shot. Matt Rule, once again, knows he needs offensive line. I know he's talked to Scott Fitterer, the GM, about getting offensive linemen. Once again, whatever the excuse is, it's not right. It's not justifiable. And it's completely ignorant to think you can't go out there and get offensive linemen. There's none available. You know what? You give somebody up that's really, really good, whether, I'm not saying give up a Christian McCaffrey, but I guarantee if you threw Christian McCaffrey's name up there, all of a sudden there'd be a couple of offensive linemen out there. They cannot tell me that nobody will budge and nobody will give up offensive linemen in this league. What you're trying to say is it's not worth it to you to get offensive linemen by giving anybody up. You have to give something up in order to receive something. And if you don't, you're going to be, for the next, what are we now? I believe we're 4-5. So we have 8 games left on the season. It's going to be a long 8 games. And let me tell you, those last 4 games are going to be your toughest games, twice against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, it's a long road ahead, a lot of work to be done. But if the Panthers are looking to have any improvements throughout the year, in the last 8 games of the season, it's hard for me to believe already that we're already halfway through the NFL season. But when you look at it, if they're going to improve and they're going to be better, it's simple. Fix the offensive line. The offensive line is the catalyst to your offense executing or not executing. It's a simple formula, yet the people that get paid the most money that are in the front office can't figure it out here in Carolina. When we come back, we will have the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum joining us. We'll be back right after this. Ladies and gentlemen, the other day I'm looking around and I'm saying, I need to become part of a Carolina Panthers group that stays positive even in these tough times. And I'll tell you what, boy, have I found a group, the Carolina Panthers Den. It's on Facebook and you need to join today. This is a group that stays positive, has a good time, and interacts with a lot of other different Carolina Panthers fans. If you want to have a great time and talk about your team, encourage your team in a way that is done very professionally, then become a member of the Carolina Panthers Den on Facebook. Make sure to join today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Frankly Speaking Sports. I'm your host, Larry Frank. What a great, great show we have. So fun. It's about to get even better as we now introduce to you the new president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Let's welcome in Josh Rawitch. Josh, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Larry. How are you?
Buddy, I'm always doing great. First of all, I do want to thank you very, very much for joining us on Frankly Speaking Sports tonight.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to. Hopefully, I'm going to try to match your energy. But you seem like a pretty energetic guy. That's going to be kind of tough at 9:30 at night.
I think you can do it.
I'm going to try.
Josh, let me ask you this: you've been in position, I guess officially, I say, for what, a couple of months now, or not even a couple of months, I guess you can say. How are you settling in? I mean, you've been involved with baseball for what, over 27 years, but a lot of the positions have been in administrative or executive positions. How are you settling into this new role? I call it baseball away from baseball, but it's still baseball.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it. It's been awesome. I mean, I got a very good intel from the previous two presidents who gave me a pretty good idea what the job was like. And so I think from my standpoint, it's been fantastic. The staff is really awesome. Many of whom have been here for 15, 20 years. They're totally dialed into what goes on here. And then some of the newer ones that everybody's just welcomed us to town. I'm here in my temporary house right now that we'll be moving out of in a couple months, but everybody in this town has welcomed me and my family, and we really just can't wait to become a part of the Cooperstown community here.
So, Josh, let me ask you this. From all your experiences, and I know you've done a lot of different jobs, from public relations, player development, media communications, and PR in general, which one of those jobs have seemed to help you the most, those experiences, in this new role as president of the Hall of Fame?
It's an interesting question. I would say probably the public relations side of things certainly is the part that I think is most applicable, just because we are such a public facing organization and doing things even just like this, being on podcasts and in a lot of ways being a public face for the Hall of Fame is a huge part of what this job is. So I'd say in my various roles doing PR and media relations of various kinds probably has prepared me the most. But really the last decade at the Diamondbacks, I was very fortunate to work for a president who more or less kind of let me learn from everything he did. And so whether it was sponsorship or broadcasting or just the way he goes about running an organization, the culture of a business. I mean, we've got 80 full-time employees here and another 20 year-round part-time employees. Anytime you're running a 100-person company, I'd say that what I learned in the last decade in Arizona really kind of prepared me for this opportunity.
Now, tell me, you've been in what we said, when you first came on, Josh, you've been in your role less than 2 months, but so far, what have you seen as the highlights of your new job, and what do you find as some of the opportunity areas in your new job?
Well, I'd say it's going to be pretty tough as a highlight to top, I guess, the first induction ceremony that I was really a part of. I was fortunate enough to come to two as a fan, but when you're sitting on the stage surrounded by all the guys whose baseball cards you collected and you're looking out to the crowd in front of you, and it just so happens that Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing are sitting right there with Derek Jeter's family. I don't know how you can really kind of top that as a life experience when I'm in the game of baseball. So I'd say that's been probably a highlight, and just being at the World Series this past week and getting a chance to go into the clubhouse after the game and talk to several of the Braves players who gave us their artifacts to make as part of the exhibit for the museum. Those are just a couple in a couple of months. I mean, you talk about those things, it almost sounds like I'm talking about somebody else's life. It's such a crazy, cool opportunity. But in terms of opportunities, or just, I don't know, things that I'm looking most forward to, I'm still kind of learning exactly how we operate here. But I think the biggest thing that we've talked a lot about, and I talked about it through my interview process with Jane Forbes Clark, who was ultimately the chairman of the board that put me in this position, it's just finding ways to stay relevant for the next generation of baseball fans. Because you and I grew up loving it, and we could walk around the Hall of Fame right now and see it through our eyes. But when I go with my son or with my daughter or with anybody who's of the generation behind me, I want to make sure that they're still experiencing it and having all the same amazing feelings that I had the first time I walked through it. And so how exactly that manifests itself in the next few years and decades ahead, I guess we'll see. But I see that as the biggest opportunity for us.
Josh, talk about the process now. And I don't think people realize you being president of the Hall of Fame doesn't mean you have all the say necessarily in who becomes members of the Hall of Fame. But what do you think about, we could sit here and debate all day long about the current process of how people get inducted into the Hall of Fame. But right now, I know it's a bunch of baseball writers that decide on, who gets inducted. Is it true for all the fans out there that don't know much about it? The president doesn't have a vote on who goes in, do they?
I don't know, and it's funny because I don't think a lot of people. When I took this job, I got all my friends, people I've known since I was a kid, telling me, "You got to get Pete Rose in there. You got to get this guy." And I had to point out that no, I do not have any say in that. But ultimately, what we see ourselves as caretakers of the game. So we do set up the process that, dating back to literally the very first days of the Hall of Fame in the mid 1930s, the baseball writers have been involved in the voting process since that very early, literally the very first class. And then very shortly thereafter, what was then the Veterans Committees and now known as the Era Committees, those came along to make sure that if the baseball writers somehow missed the mark somewhere along the way, that there were other ways for people to look at how you might get in. And so ultimately, my job is to make sure, along with several other people in the office, to make sure that we put the process in place, that it gets implemented, but we do not get a vote. I will be in the room when the Era Committee debates all of these names that just got announced this past week, but I won't be weighing in. I won't be giving my opinions on the names of those guys. We're just ultimately there to make sure that the process is carried out fairly, that it's confidential, because you obviously want that room to feel comfortable that what they say in that room isn't going to leave that room. And so that's really what we do. And then once people are elected to the Hall of Fame, it's our job to make sure that we honor them. We create the plaques, we create the whole ceremony, the induction weekend. All those things fall to the responsibility of the staff.
So let me ask you this, and I don't know if this is a question for you or if it would be a question for the baseball writers, but I'm sure you'll answer it accordingly. It was back in, I want to say, 2006. And I know you had the opportunity before you became president on your trip up to Cooperstown to go to the Negro League Baseball Museum. I had a chance for the first time 2 years ago to go. It was just one of the best places, right up there with the Baseball Hall of Fame that I ever been to. It was just incredible amount of knowledge, I know you will agree, and it was just incredible. But even when you go in there, they'll tell you it's a museum. It's not a Hall of Fame. It's to give you the history on the Negro Leagues and what it was all about. In 2006, the Baseball Hall of Fame inducted 17 Negro players, such great players. I think Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Monty Irvin, Buck Leonard, I think was in there. Just a number, as you know. And then Robert Manfred just recently bestowed the Major League, announced that 2,400 Negro League players, Black and Hispanic, were now given Major League Baseball credit, as they were Major League Baseball players. My question to you is, what happened after 2006? It seems like since 2006, the and I know you haven't been there, but the Baseball Hall of Fame hasn't really recognized any more of the Negroid players. Is that something that is Baseball Hall of Fame related or Baseball Writers Association?
So a couple things there. One, I mean, that group that went in 2006 was certainly the largest group, but believe it or not, there were actually quite a number of Negro Leagues players who were inducted prior to that for 30 years. Now, maybe not at the same numbers that happened in that big election in 2006, but Negro Leaguers like Satchel Paige and others had been in previously. And then in 2006, what happened? MLB, right around the turn of the century, commissioned a study. They paid significant amounts of money. I think it was a couple $100,000, I believe, to basically study the Negro Leagues and figure out, hey, is there anything we're missing here? And that led to the 2006 vote that put in 17 players. At that time, what was said, it was basically, okay, we've now studied, we've seen who belongs in there from the group of Negro Leaguers, who belongs in the Plaque Gallery. Unless we get more information, we are not going to keep looking at this every 2 to 3 years. They felt like at the time we've corrected the wrongs that existed, and 17 players on top of the other, I think it was 14 others. I think it was well into the 30s of Negro Leaguers who have been inducted over the years. They felt like unless there was additional information, there wasn't a need to really go back and study it again. And what's happened probably in the last 15 years, really thanks to a number of incredible historians, but probably none more so than the Seamheads database that went and basically did for the Negro Leagues what Retro Sheet and Baseball Reference and these other websites that logged statistics. They went and found incredible amounts of data that I think really helped people put a lot of these statistics into perspective. And so when MLB, for that reason, that was one of the reasons we felt like there's more information, so it's time to probably look again. And then, like you said earlier this year, MLB recognized the Negro Leagues. And many people think the Negro Leagues were like the major leagues. I mean, they really weren't. They were a collection of different leagues all throughout various parts of the country that they weren't one giant league that was called the Negro Leagues. They were a series of leagues that ultimately were deemed to be on par with Major League Baseball, the level of talent that was being played in MLB. And so when Major League Baseball kind of made that announcement, we ultimately decided it was time to look again. And we had numerous different committees look into who belongs on the ballot. It was the first time ever that our early baseball ballot is anybody pre-1950. So that includes people who are in the Negro Leagues, people who were not in the Negro Leagues, and people who even predated the Negro Leagues, because there were actually integrated baseball back in the 1800s that people don't really talk about. So anyway, anybody pre-1950 was eligible to be on this ballot, and a series of historians put together 10 names that are going to be considered again in December at the winter meetings for potential induction into the Hall of Fame.
So you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Josh, in the telecast, but we are talking to, by the way, Josh Rawitch, the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Besides your friends that, I've called you, how many times when you're walking around that Baseball Hall of Fame do actual guests say to you, hey, what do you think about this one or that one not being in the Hall of Fame? I mean, you have to get questions about that all the time. And like you said, you can't really say your opinion because ethically, It's probably not the right thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully at this point, well, I wouldn't say thankfully, but I'm not that recognizable just yet that I'm walking around the museum and people are stopping me. But I will say that one of the best things about this particular Hall of Fame that I would say does not seem to be the case of maybe the other Halls of Fames is just the level of debate that goes into that. And I remember the podcast you did a while back that I listened to where you talked about the 10 guys you felt like belonged in there. And you're obviously not alone in your thinking on a number of people there that fans love to debate who belongs in there. And so while I don't personally get that many questions yet, I understand why the questions exist. I understand why people have really, really strong opinions that how could it possibly be that this person isn't in there? And someone on the other side of the coin feels just as adamant, like there's no way this person's ever going to get in the Hall of Fame or they ruin the Hall of Fame. That is, I think, what makes this place really unique is that there's so much talk around who belongs in the Plaque Gallery and who doesn't. But I should also specify, and this is actually particularly relevant just in light of ESPN's recent documentary on Barry Bonds, all the people that people question about, whether it's Thurman Munson, Pete Rose, Barry Bonds, or anybody in between, they're all in the museum. They're all documented for the sake of history. In most cases, we have artifacts from almost every one of these people, and they're documented. When people talk about the Hall of Fame, obviously they're talking about the Plaque Gallery and having a plaque on the wall, and that's obviously a different level of enshrinement.
Now, once again, I know you can't say, and I'm not going to ask you it, but I know Pete Rose names, Gil Hodges is another one that comes up, which they're having a committee, one of the New Era committees. I know votes on that soon. I think that's happening. But my question to you is with the Pete Rose thing, forget about Pete Rose. I know we all have our opinions, but is it the base? Once again, I'm asking you so the fans understand this. When you talk about the integrity of the game, is that a rule from the Baseball Hall of Fame, or is that a written rule from Major League Baseball?
So it's kind of two different questions you're asking. So we do have, as part of what we give the baseball writers when they're voting on who belongs in the Hall of Fame, is what people often refer to now as kind of the integrity clause, or it's sportsmanship and character, the character clause. All of that is a very important part of what baseball writers take into account when they vote for someone to go into the Hall of Fame. But Major League Baseball would need to put, in the case of, say, Shoeless Joe Jackson or Pete Rose, they are not currently eligible to even be voted on. So it's hard to, depending on your question, it's not like the writers had a chance to vote in these people. They were not eligible according to the rules of Major League Baseball. To be eligible to be voted on for the Hall of Fame, you have to be in good standing with Major League Baseball. And in these cases, they're not. But in other cases, there have been people who have been eligible that the baseball writers may decide don't meet the level of character, ethics, or integrity that they feel. And ultimately, you don't need 100% to get in. You need 75%, which is a very high standard. But ultimately, 75% is what has been pretty much going back the 82 years, the percentage required to get into the Hall of Fame. And we think that's the right amount, 3/4 of the electorate.
And you and I both know there's always going to be some players that don't make it, where some people are going to say should make it, other people are going to say other people should make it. But the question I was getting at, Josh, and not to push or anything, but is it so it's not what impact you had on the field then, it's the impact overall on what you had? Because I mean, no matter who you say, nobody can argue. You and I can't sit here and argue Pete Rose didn't have a positive impact on the field of baseball, the greatest hitter or arguably of our time. We know it. So now it is more than what's just done about playing the game of baseball.
Correct. And unfortunately, I wish I had in front of me the exact verbiage, but when you go to our website, you can see it. It clearly, to be considered to get into the Hall of Fame, what you have to have done on the field has to be really among the top 1% who have ever done it. But then ultimately, on top of that, the writers are told that they can take into consideration the integrity, sportsmanship, and character of the people who they're voting on. And so in that instance, we don't define that for them. We don't tell them how to define character. We don't tell them how to define sportsmanship. It's really on each independent voter. And that's in a lot of ways why the system works, because the voters do get to decide that on their own. If we were telling them what that meant, then we might as well just decide ourselves who's going in there.
Correct.
I mean, ultimately, we entrust that group who has been watching baseball for generations and writing about baseball and chronicling the history. We entrust them to vote the way that they see fit. And if 3 out of every 4 of them believe you belong in, that's a pretty good threshold.
Absolutely. We're talking to Josh Rawitch, president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Josh, I want to get into a couple more things and then we'll let you run. Talk about, I always wondered this, when you run the ceremonies at the beginning of the summer or during the middle of summer, whatever it is, June-ish or whatever, when you run the ceremonies, do you, and it might sound like a weird question, but let's say like the last one, I believe it was Jeter and Walker, I think Marvin Freeman, just to name a few that I remember off the top of my head. When they were inducted, do you move things around in the Baseball Hall of Fame knowing that you're going to get a bunch of Yankee fans, or in Larry Walker's case, he was an Expo and a Rocky? Do you move things around because now you know you're going to have a lot of Yankee fans, or a lot of Expo fans, or so on during that time so that people could see those things?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say we move it around. There's a few things we will do. I mean, obviously we do have a store there, and so we will make sure that we're stocked properly with Rockies gear or Cardinals gear for Ted Simmons, or Yankees gear. So certainly that piece of the business has to pay attention to who's going in. And then there are certain portions of the museum. There are 2 specific areas. One right before you go into the Plaque Gallery that is actually focused on the current inductees, the very next group of inductees, where you'll be able to watch a video about them. And there's a spot where you can take kind of a picture in the wall where they're, it's hard to explain, but an alcove right before you walk into the Plaque Gallery. And then there is upstairs on the 3rd level a specific area geared towards each one of these guys that's like a locker of their items. It's a display of items of Jeters, of Walkers, of Ted Simmons. But we don't know. We don't go through the museum and say, okay, there's going to be a lot of Yankee fans this year. Let's load up on Yankee stuff. Really what we're trying to do is tell the story of all 30 teams all throughout the museum. And there's no shortage of Yankee stories. And there's the other thing that I'd say that we've added, and we launched this during or right before the pandemic. So unfortunately, it didn't get nearly as much attention as it probably should. But when you come and visit, one of the things that happens when you walk in the front door, you get your ticket and they'll ask you, where are you from? Who's your favorite team? So you may say, okay, I'm a Reds fan. I came here from Cincinnati. we have this program called the Starting Nine, and they will hand you a sheet of paper that's basically a scavenger hunt of 9 items that are kind of representative of the Reds. And it's not like the 9 best items. It's 9 really unique items that some may go back to the 1800s, some might be from last year with Joey Votto, but you can walk around the museum and have it tailored to your experience. So all 30 teams can do that. And then on top of that, if you happen to have an inductee from your team going in, there are sections focused on that particular person. But we didn't like load up on Rocky stuff this year or load up on Expos because ultimately we want to tell the story of all 30 teams throughout the museum.
Makes sense. Now, the customer's experience. I know they say you spend an average of 3 hours in there, but everybody that I talk to says, first of all, it's so cost effective. It doesn't cost a lot to get into I think they said like $25 on average. And they say, Larry, forget 3 hours. You could spend a whole day. Some even say they would like to go back because there's still stuff they could not see. The fan experience, from what everyone says, is top notch at the Baseball Museum.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the first time I came with my father, I think back in 2001, we really only spent 4 hours or so there, and we didn't even scratch the surface. I mean, it is impossible to get anywhere near. Forget even everything upstairs. We have 40,000 artifacts throughout the building, many of which are downstairs in the archives. But you really, frankly, need an entire weekend of going through. If you want to do it at a pace where you're really taking stuff in, if you want to just kind of fly through and catch the highlights, sure, you could do that in 3 to 4 hours. But if you're a true baseball fan, honestly, I really would come for a long weekend and plan on spending several days making your way through the various exhibits. Because if you're going to stop and read some of the stuff that's there, you want to actually understand the history going back to the mid 1800s, or you want to use some of the touchscreen stuff that we have that allows you to really explore records or watch videos or walk through the Plaque Gallery. And let's say you're a Phillies fan, just stopping to read the plaques of all the Phillies in the Hall of Fame could take you 2 hours. I mean, it's an incredible experience. And on top of that, Cooperstown is a village. It's magical. I mean, we're right on a lake where you can take a boat out and go on the lake. We've got amazing restaurants. We've got other museums all within town. We're literally right around the corner from our Hall of Fame or 2 other world-class museums. You really could spend a long weekend to a full week here and not run out of stuff. So I know I sound a little bit Chamber of Commerce when I say that, but I mean, the reality is every single day I have an alert go off on my calendar at 3:00, and I walk into the museum for 10 minutes and I go look at some case, either somebody's plaque, maybe who I don't know anything about, or an artifact or a handful of artifacts that I want to learn about. And I will probably be doing that for the next several years if I really want to take it in entirely. And so to come in and try to get it all done in 3 hours is really hard. At the bare minimum, I'd say lock in a full day, and really, frankly, a weekend is the best way to do it.
Last 2 questions, and they're going to be on the fan experience. What's the one thing, Josh, that you see where fans go in and the one thing they are so amazed of when they come out of it, they say, that was incredible, that one particular thing? What has been the one, well, I'm sure there's many things, but what is the one highlight that you hear the most out of people that are visiting the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Man, what's so hard is that it is different for everybody because it depends on where you came from. So, I mean, to answer your question, but then I'm going to cheat a little bit, I would say we purposely have people go upstairs first. They watch the film, it's about an 18-minute movie that literally moved me to tears. I mean, it is so good. It really is. It's this incredible movie we had made about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago. That just, if you're a baseball fan, it's gonna bring you to tears. It's that good. And I've heard a lot of people talk about that. And then you continue through the museum on the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor, and we purposely have you finish at the Plaque Gallery, because that is kind of when people think of a Hall of Fame, you walk into that sacred Plaque Gallery and you see people's eyes light up, and it's really pretty special. But so to cheat, I mean, those are the things I'd say, the film and the actual Plaque Gallery. But to cheat a little bit, I mean, honestly, what we hear the most is conversations between generations of families where a grandparent, a parent, and a kid are all walking around together, and the grandparent's pointing at this thing. I remember when I saw Willie Mays, and the parent might be saying, yeah, but I remember when I saw Will Clark, and the kid might be saying, I saw Buster Posey. And it happens no matter what city you grew up in. They're all over the museum. So that's what I think. You see people leave here and they're just blown away by how it connects them to the past generations. It's really pretty special.
So and the closing question, what is, as president of the Hall of Fame, what's the one goal for you to have every person that comes in there have from an experience? I know it's all different, but I never heard anyone, there's certain things you'll hear, like a restaurant review, where there's going to be some bad reviews. I have never heard, and I've talked to a lot of people, a bad review about the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's something every baseball fan, like you says, dreams of going to see. But what about the experience do you want people leaving thinking in their head when they leave?
Well, it's really honestly what I just said. I want them to leave there connected to their past generations. And whether that means their parents or their kids or their future kids. Maybe you don't have kids yet. You're 22 years old, but you're thinking about my grandparents used to. I want them leaving there thinking, I got to come back to this place because it reminded me why I love baseball so much. It connected the generations of my family in a way that not a lot of things in American history can do. And that's, I think it's really for us, it's connecting generations, it's honoring excellence, and it's preserving history. We want people to walk around. Most people don't realize we're a nonprofit organization. We make money off of donations. So we want people to think, that's pretty cool that this incredible document that was between the Yankees and the Red Sox that sold Babe Ruth 100 plus years ago is preserved here in temperature controlled circumstances so that it's there for 100 years from now when my grandkids want to come and see the same document, they'll be able to see these things. That's what I want people to leave, is to have that same unbelievable experience that my dad had the first time he came, that I had, that my kids had. We just want people to leave here feel like you said, going home and telling everybody, I know Cooperstown isn't the easiest place in the world to get to, but find a way to get there because you won't regret it.
Josh, for the fans that are listening, do the hours of operation change now as it goes into the wintertime? What are the hours of operation? So, because we get people from all over the United States listening, what is your hours switching to?
So prior to COVID, we used to stay open much later. We've now been closing still around 5 o'clock. So that won't change. We'll be open till 5 o'clock every day. We're open every day of the year other than Christmas, New Year's, and Thanksgiving. So there's only 3 days that we close up. And honestly, for people who are thinking about coming, wintertime is oddly enough a great time to come because you almost have the museum to yourself. It's not like when you come in summertime and there's hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people on a given day wandering around the museum. If you get here in the winter, you can have your run of the place and you'll really appreciate it in a different way. So hopefully people will become members of the organization and come back as often as possible. Take your time, make it a family trip, or come on your own and do it at your own pace. It's open pretty much all day throughout the winter time. So hopefully we'll see people out here. And if you come and let me know that you heard me talking on your podcast here, Larry, we'll find a way to give them a little something special when they get here. All they got to do is let the front desk know that they were listening to Larry Frank's podcast, was it Frankly Speaking Sports, Frankly Talking Sports, and we'll get them a little something special. I'll come out and give them something.
All right, my friend. Well, listen, as always, I appreciate you taking time. I know you're a busy man, out of your busy schedule, and best of luck to you in your new role.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry. Have a great one.
All right, you too. Stay safe. All right, that was Josh Rawitch, president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Hopefully that answered a lot of your questions. I know a lot of baseball fans out there still wonder how the voting's done, how much involvement is done by the writers. And as you see, the Baseball Museum, he's in charge of the museum. They're in charge of the aftermath of the voting, basically. They put together all the history, just an unbelievable job that Josh and his staff does. And if you ever get the opportunity to go, folks, I don't need to tell you. You just heard it. Ask anyone. You definitely need to go. And like Josh said, mention that you heard about it on Frankly Speaking Sports, and he'll take care of you. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all of us at Frankly Speaking Sports, we thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be back tomorrow with College Football Tuesday, beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Me and my buddy, Zach McKinnell. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, the other day I'm looking around and I'm saying, I need to become part of a Carolina Panthers group that stays positive even in these tough times. And I'll tell you what, boy, have I found a group, the Carolina Panthers Den. It's on Facebook and you need to join today. This is a group that stays positive, has a good time, and interacts with a lot of other different Carolina Panthers fans. If you want to have a great time and talk about your team, encourage your team in a way that is done very professionally, then become a member of the Carolina Panthers Den on Facebook. Make sure to join today. Hey!